All righty. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, everyone. I can see the participant numbers going up, so I'll just give a couple more minutes to get people settled in. I'll start off by saying welcome and happy anniversary to Field Inclusive. My name is R. I am a Field Inclusive volunteer. I'm still fairly new to the organization, but I'm sort of stepping in last minute to help with some technical stuff on this webinar. So I'm a new face, but still happy to be here, still part of Field Inclusive, and happy to be sort of hosting this webinar for today on the second anniversary of Field Inclusive. So happy birthday to Field Inclusive. Um, so this webinar is being recorded. It'll be posted on the Field Inclusive YouTube channel. So just be sure to follow Field Inclusive there for easy access to these recordings. Please stay until the end of the webinar. So we'll announce the winner of the anniversary giveaway. That was part of registering for the event. Your name will be included in the anniversary giveaway. So please stay until the end to see if you are the lucky winner for today. Um, Shortly, I will introduce our speaker, but first, I would like to give a huge thanks to everyone who has donated and supported Field Inclusive. Today marks the founding of Field Inclusive, and we are so proud of everything we've been able to accomplish in just 2 years. Thanks to everyone, we've continued our many partnerships with various organizations, hosted our first in-person event for Field Inclusive Week, our bird walk at Dix Park in Raleigh, North Carolina, continued and gained many volunteers for our Beginning Birders program, which is coincidentally where I started with Field Inclusive. And this year alone, have conducted 15 social field safety workshops to continue to amplify our mission for more safe and inclusive outdoor experiences for all. Perhaps our proudest accomplishment of this year was being able to support 17 marginalized students through our research grants, travel awards, and fellowship. Keep an eye out for our next newsletter, which will include a year-end review detailing all our activities, goals accomplished, funding, and next steps. It is through our many generous donations and sponsorships that we can continue our mission of supporting marginalized and historically excluded field researchers in the natural sciences. Um, and without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce our topic and speaker for today's webinar. Over these 2 years, the most frequent comments and questions we've encountered from people being unaware that social field safety is an issue for marginalized researchers and surprised that there are barriers to participating in field research. So today, we'd love to continue the conversation to address the history that created current social field safety issues and what we can do to start solving them with our anniversary speaker this year, Dr. Mamie Parker. Among her many accolades and involvements on many boards and initiatives to advance wildlife and the environment, Dr. Parker's nearly 3-decade-long career as a fish and wildlife biologist with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service spanned various locations across the country. Her exceptional leadership within the agency earned her the prestigious Ira Gabelson Award, Fish and Wildlife Service Leadership Award, and the distinction of being the first Black Fish Wildlife Service Regional Director and Senior Executive Service in the Fish and Wildlife Service. One of her most memorable moments was a call from the Bass Pro Shop founder informing her that she received the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies John L. Morris Lifetime Achievement Award, named in his honor. Throughout her career, she has worked to advance diversity and opportunities for minority students in conservation and fisheries careers. In 2016, she was awarded the Emmeline Moore Prize for the American Fisheries Society for those efforts. Her lifelong dedication to conservation biology and environmental stewardship remains an inspiration to all who encounter her remarkable story. As we hear from Mamie today, we invite the audience to write questions using the Q&A function to be answered at the end of the presentation. So with that, I will turn it over to Mamie. Thank you for being with us here today, Dr. Parker. I'm really, really excited to hear from you. And as I mentioned, please use the chat function to drop any questions that you have. At the end, we'll have about 5 to 10 minutes to answer those questions. So please do not hesitate to use the chat. And without further ado, I will hand it over to Dr. Parker.
Thank you so much, R, and thank you for really making me feel welcome earlier and making sure that everything goes smoothly. And what a wonderful introduction. Really learned a lot about the organization, knew a little bit about it, but appreciate just what you've done so far. It is my pleasure. Hello, everyone, and happy Friday. It is my pleasure to be here this afternoon. I have the privilege of living close, very, very close to America's first river, the Potomac River, which is a river that was roamed and used by the ancestors and of Pocahontas and many of the Iroquois, as well as the Algonquians and others in this area. And so I'm honored to be able to share these resources and enjoy these resources. I'm also happy to be here to say happy birthday to Field Inclusive. And this is just a wonderful time to celebrate. And I've been called many things, but one of which I'm most proud of is the celebration queen. And so while I can be very serious, can act like Dr. Parker, I can also make sure that we bring joy and happiness to a birthday celebration and the anniversary of all the wonderful work that you were done by amplifying and supporting marginalized and historically included biologists and researchers in this field of study. And this is all about also encouraging us to look for ways to increase membership. And so I'll make sure that I do my part in helping people know that you exist, because I think that's one of the big things that we need to do, because breaking down these barriers are so important. And I did not have these type of opportunities that you have where you're building community. And I just think it's great that you're doing that. Not only are you looking out for social field safety, psychological safety, but also understanding that we need different skill sets too to help us get to where we need to do. So most of the time when people come to a webinar or seminar, they're wondering, okay, who's this lady and how long will she talk and what she's going to talk about? So I'll tell you that up front. I'll give you my life story. I'll talk about my conservation journey, and that will take me about 30 minutes. So hopefully you'll stick with me for that long. In fact, I'm thanking you in advance. I know many of you all are learn a lot about empathy, because that's one of the things that we do when we talk about being inclusive, is all about being empathetic as well. So give me the empathy to listen for about 30 minutes, and then I will uh, really wrap up for the next 15 minutes, and then we'll move on into Q&As, and you'll get a chance to ask me some questions. Uh, Let me hear from you in the chat. Is that okay? Are you fine with that? Can I depend on you to be there for me? Okay. While you are letting me know that, I'm going to pull up my slides here, that I do have a few of those that I would like to share with you. But let me see, who do I have? Do I have people in the chat? Huh, okay. Let me just go back here a little bit. My slides were not quite on the right page here, but I'll start right here again by saying second anniversary, happy birthday. I'm happy that you were born. And so as I think about what I want to talk about when we think about birthdays, and we also think about anniversaries and think about the work that you're doing, I thought I'd talk about passion, inspiration, and excellence when it comes to breaking concrete barriers. And I've listed some of those that really, really stood out for me as I think about my journey in this field. And you can see those up there. Of course, I put at the bottom of the list, but they're not in any form are they in any priority order. Racism and sexism is something that I've experienced my entire life. I think the one that sometimes we forget about is the isolationism that comes with us being the one and only. And I think that's important for us to talk about that, because I talk to children quite often, and this generation of sixth, seventh, and eighth graders, they always ask and they always say to me, "You're bringing in all these speakers, and they're always telling us they're the first Black this and they're the first Black that. And why is that important? That's not important to us." And so we need to be able to talk to them about why it is important, because we've had to not only overcome these barriers, but break concrete blocks when we talk about this. And so that's why I think it's important for us to do that. So I have the privilege of being on several boards, as you've heard from R, and it's amazing. The National Wildlife Federation is one of those boards that really stands out for me. And I'm just so grateful that I have the privilege of working with them. And when we think about being inclusive and breaking barriers, when we think about passion, inspiration, and excellence, this organization has been one of those that are in the forefront of some of the work that they've done. So if you get a chance to make sure you look up at the National Wildlife Federation and see what they are doing. But right after the George Floyd incident and what happened in Minneapolis, it was just on my heart to see what we could do at the National Wildlife Federation. I serve on their board of directors there. And quite frankly, I was pissed. And I was like, what can I do to get over feeling this way, feeling paralyzed? Because sometimes when you get mad, you get paralyzed. And particularly for me, it held something special in my heart. My birthday is October 14th. So was George Floyd. I'm a little bit older than he is, but I lived in Minneapolis and I went to get my hair done right across the street from the area in which he died. And so when we thought about what we do after the George Floyd death and what happened to them, we thought we'd do some webinars to talk about what are some of how do we create safe places in the outdoors, which is one of the subjects that you all are talking about too. So we talked to a lot of people. We had 4 webinars. We brought a lot of scientists together. We brought a lot of people in this space together. And we also reached out to academia to find out what they thought about this issue. And basically, we were able to come up to say many of the barriers to outdoors and some of the things that happen that makes us feel that we're excluded in many cases. It goes way back to early childhood exposure, to the fact that we don't always address the historical traumatic experience that we've had in the outdoors, and our forefathers and mothers have had, ancestors have had in the past, acknowledging accessibility challenges. And that's one of the things that Field Inclusive is doing, and I think that's important. And then the financial resources. And I tell many stories about how when I first went to work at U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service as an intern, I didn't have the money to even pay for my entire transportation to my internship. One person on the campus of the University of Arkansas had to go and borrow some money, $200 from the bank, and gave it to me to help me. That was still not enough, as you can imagine. I got to my location where I was going, and my boss said to me, I found a place for you to live. The security deposit is, and I can't quite remember how much, but I do know I didn't have it. And I said, well, I'm going to have to go back home because I don't have that. And he said to me, I'll loan you that money until you get paid. That sounded really good, except it took a whole month for me to get my first paycheck. So some of the financial resources and the challenges that we incur when we're talking about us as scientists and biologists and researchers, sometimes those are overlooked. I have the privilege of serving on the board had the privilege of chairing the board of the Student Conservation Association and talking about their internships and how much money they actually pay interns. It's not enough. Really, really, it's not enough. It's not a living wage. And so it becomes something for the privileged white children and students that have parents and others that can help them. That was not the case for me. Most of the people that I know in my circle, they were sending money home to parents. So I speak a lot on financial resources because I think that's one of the things that we often forget about when we think about feeling excluded. But in order to do all this, we need people like my first boss who had passion. I want to talk about passion. I'm going to talk about inspiration, and I'm going to talk about excellence, paving the way for others to succeed, having the courage to really, really go and not knowing what's on the other side. And this is something that pioneers often do. And I and others of you that are in the audience are certainly pioneers, and courage is so important. And I know you would not be where you are today if you did not have perseverance and hard work and the talent that is necessary to do the job. Some of these things aren't catchy, but they're certainly authentic and true. And trust is one of those as we think about feeling and making sure that we feel included in an environment where we're not customarily included in. So let me just give you a little information about who I am and where I come from. So my mother was an avid angler from southern Arkansas, right on the Louisiana border. So I had relatives in Louisiana and Arkansas, farms in between, right there in the Mississippi Delta, one of the poorest regions in this country, but one of the areas that had rich, rich natural resources. So my mother would oftentimes go fishing and enjoy the outdoors, but she oftentimes did not and was not didn't have children that really wanted to do it. And so she had already had 5 boys and 5 girls and was about to have her 11th child. And she said, I'm going to take this child with me outdoors. My mother prayed for a boy. There were already 5 girls and 5 boys. She assumed that a boy would want to do the outside things, the outdoor stuff that she wanted to do. Um, Fortunately or unfortunately, I was a girl, and but she still took it upon herself and her commitment to take me outdoors with her, and that's where I got my started. To the right here on this photo, to my right, you'll see family members that are still alive at this time. One of which was my fourth grade teacher. But it was all about passion in my family and knowing that I was a part of something bigger. And that's what your program is about. And that's what this whole organization is about how do we stay connected? How do we stay connected to each other? How do we build community? How do we support pioneers with passion? And how do we continue to connect with nature? Colin O'Mara is another one that's a part of the National Wildlife Federation. He is the CEO of that organization and president. And he said to save nature to save ourselves. And this is exactly, I believe, is what saved me. Ninth grade, I was an avid outdoors person, and many of the girls in my ninth grade class, they were pregnant in the ninth grade. And now they're great grandparents. And I know for a fact that it was limited amount of other things that you could do in the outdoors. I had the privilege of going to Bayou Bartholomew, the beautiful bayou that's the longest bayou in the world with over 367 species there. And it was here on Bayou Bartholomew that I cast my first line, caught my first fish, but also my love for the outdoors, my love for my doing things with my mother there, and also was able to avoid being one of those mothers early on. The passion also is what I believe that helped me persevere as a third grader, where I integrated my third grade class. In the middle here, you'll see me on a photo here. And it wasn't a very pleasant experience. And I tell this because I talk about isolationism and how important it is for us to address that. I sat in that class for many, many, many days, and kids were told not to talk to me. In my community, white kids did not talk to black kids. White adults did not talk to white adults in a segregated community unless they had business to take care of or they worked together. Not a lot of socializing happened in those communities. That was the standard there. So in the school, the parents told their children they couldn't do this, they shouldn't do the same thing. And as you can imagine, a third grader feeling excluded, my first experience there. But one day, a little girl that looked somewhat like this one here came up to me, and she said, after weeks of me sitting out at recess all by myself and feeling excluded, and of course, called the N word and many other things in that school, she said, my mommy says I'm a leader. And she said, my mommy said, if I'm going to lead, then I should do what I want to do. And with courage, she said, and tomorrow I'm going to play with you on the playground. It was interesting. I wonder why she didn't do it that day, but she said, tomorrow I'm going to play with you. And she said, when I play with you, June's going to play with you. And when June plays with you, Donna's going to play with you. And then everybody will play with you after that because we're leaders. And so allyship is so important. And mentoring is what I got from this little blue-eyed blonde, third grade, and no longer had to deal with a lot of things that I got from many of the boys in my class. Nature teaches us so much. And I think this is a great message when we think about 2 years that you've been in existence. The founder of this great organization has made a lot of deposits and you're getting a lot of returns. I learned this from my mother on the banks of Bayou Bartholomew. No deposit, no return, nothing in, nothing out. She also said, be persistent. And that was my first introduction to seeing a woodpecker. And that was a message there that was related to that. Leap and grow your wings on your way down. I just really believe that that's what happened with this organization 2 years ago. They didn't have all the answers. And when we think about inclusiveness, we won't have all the answers. We have to look for ways to get them as we move ahead and working our way down. Ninth grade, my ninth grade teacher introduced me to Marvin Gaye's song, Mercy, Mercy Me. Things are not like they used to be. What happened to the blue skies? And he said, radiation in our air, fish full of mercury, basically from his album, What's Going On? And here is when I learned a lot about nationwide, but particularly in my geographic area of the country, what was going on. And if we think about being inclusive, and the work that you all as biologists and scientists should continue to do, some of these issues are still issues that we're struggling with many, many, many years later. So we can be inspired not only by teachers, we can be inspired with passion from teachers as allies or from musicians. And I love, 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 and can quote quite a few musicians, and including Biggie Small and others, as I thinking about living the life that we live and how important it is for us to do that. Uh, and Marvin Gaye was the one that taught me about those agriculture fields and the runoff, the construction destruction, power plants, hazardous substance disposal. All these things were happening in my community. I got inspired when I thought about the stacks that were in my area. Georgia Pacific was right there in my community. I smelled the smoke from and all of the emissions coming from the various paper mills. And I was told it smelled like money, and everybody was excited about it. I also saw crop dusters flying over fields that I worked in, and realized after hearing Marvin Gaye's song and looking deeper into what was going on, that this was something that will affect us later in our lives with cancer and other things, respiratory problems that weren't good with us. Fish, a large part of the protein in my diet came from fish that we caught. And so this poster, I think, says it best when it says, "Y'all gonna stop killing us," because what I started realizing and was inspired, my inspiration was that's what was happening. And so now I really, really am inspired by seeing beautiful pictures of Baltimore Orioles and looking at falls like this. My husband and I just left Quebec City, Canada, and Montreal, and of course, where we got a chance to see beautiful sceneries like this. And I believe that all people, no matter where they are, should be able to enjoy the outdoors and see things like that. I was at the University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff, and didn't know what I was going to study, and decided it was going to either be biology or political science. I have the privilege of doing them both right now. I can get into policy when I want to, or I can stay into biology if I wish to do so. But to tell you the truth, I chose biology because my ninth grade teacher, I had a crush on him. He was going to be my baby daddy one day. And I wanted to study biology to impress him. He thought he didn't know I had a crush on him, but I wanted to study biology to impress him when I went back home to my little small hometown. This is not him. This individual was Hannibal Bolton. He came to my home school class. I mean, he came to my home room class at the university and told me about the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. He sold me on the agency. He was a fishery biologist in Wisconsin. He led me to believe if I signed up for an internship program, that my job would be in Wisconsin. In Arkansas. I discovered that the job was in Wisconsin, but he had inspired me. And so, after overcoming a lot of my fear, which is what I think we all need to do as scientists, as researchers that are in a field that we're not not very comfortable, and we have not built our strong communities yet, that we have to think about what fear is and how we can overcome it. And I was doubtful, but now I have lots of great therapy and a lot of great support from others. And this is what I tell students. I happen to serve on the board of directors for the Nicholas School of the Environment at Duke University and other places, American University. And I tell students, focus on the real problem and then detach ourselves from the emotions that are associated with it. Think about the outcome, begin with the end in mind. And if you need to, seek advice, seek professional help, whatever it takes, and then keep looking ahead. And that's so important because what fear does, it blocks inclusiveness. And this is one of the problems we have with uh, people of power. White people are afraid in many cases that in order and white men in particular was what I have seen in my world is that something's going to be taken from them and not looking at the abundance of the power but the scarcity of the pie and therefore the lack of power. And so what I try to preach to everyone is that we're all powerful and we're all better working with each other. I also try to look deep inside of many of the white men that I work with and talk to them about what fear is stopping you from moving ahead to help others. Because what we know about fear is false evidence appearing real. False evidence appearing real. This was very important to me as I learned to dive in Green Bay and work in the Mississippi River and several of the other places that I'll talk to you about. So I started my career, my journey as an intern at U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I think this mission statement is so important, and I put it here, but you see all the various types of work that's done there. Many of you all probably know about this already. Working with others to conserve, protect, and enhance fish, wildlife, plants, and their habitat. And over a period of time, once I became a member of the Senior Executive Service of U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, I heard and watched us add for the benefit, the continuing benefit of the American people. That was not always in the mission statement. So I left Arkansas, went to Wisconsin, had an internship there with all intentions of going back south. My next internship was in Candiota County, Minnesota. Oofda, a long ways from home, but a great opportunity to learn. Again, with all intentions of going back south, my next job was in Green Bay, Wisconsin. And I moved to Green Bay and with all intentions of going south, ended up in Madison, Wisconsin, leaving Wisconsin after many years and moving to Columbia, Missouri. Left Missouri and moved back to Minneapolis, Minnesota, and then to Atlanta, Georgia, Washington, D.C., Massachusetts, and then back to Washington, D.C. And these are just some of the photos of the great opportunities and the great species that I had a privilege of working with, also working in some great areas in this country, here in the Commonwealth. And the last picture at the bottom of the screen, I had the privilege of going to China too. Passion, inspiration, being inspired by folks like President Barack Obama. Had the privilege over my career of working for 5 presidential appointees directly for them. And this was really wonderful to watch the politics, but also get involved in Water Resource Development Act projects and the Great Lakes Clean Water Act projects with Environmental Protection Agency and the Army Corps of Engineers, the Mississippi River, the Missouri River, just across the country. Got a chance to do a lot of great things with energy use permits, transmission corridors, wetland protection, worked on the Section 10404 program, part of the Corps of Engineers, but also the private lands program where we help private landowners grow wildlife on their lands. And coastal mapping, one of the last jobs that I had was overseeing the mapping of all the coastal areas here in this country to determine which communities and which properties actually got insurance, flood insurance. Of course, endangered species recovery and consultation. I talk about endangered species. I'm more worried at this point in time, or as worried about invasive species as I am endangered species. As we address climate change and what it means, and how invasive species have expanded when we think about our global markets and global economy, the things that are coming into this country, these are things that are of concern of mine. And then fish passage was another one. Have to say excellence in meeting some great women in my career. And I encourage you all to look at this book. It's a great one, Women in Wildlife Science. Recently came out from the Wildlife Society. Some wonderful women that are included in this book and their stories, building equity, diversity, and inclusion. But it also talks about setbacks that we've had. And we know this is probably a very popular slide for many of you all, but the strengths of us working together, excellence. If we want all hands on deck to relieve some of the agricultural impacts and increase green construction and infrastructure and decrease the work in oil and gas and drilling, managing mining operations and looking at deforestation, as well as landfills and hazardous substance disposal, we need all hands on deck. And that means that's the excellence we need. But these concrete barriers are still here, and they are strong and they are mighty. And what I believe is one solution, because people say you don't just come with problems, you bring some solutions to the table, is engaging different communities. And I've had the privilege of working with one great organization, a group of Black women. They're like the Black Junior League. They are called Links Incorporated, the Links Incorporated, LINKS Incorporated. 299 chapters throughout the United States. Black women have over 13 members of Congress that are members, including the current Vice President of the United States. And these are women that are the Black Junior League that are in the field. We are in communities, and we're all required to do 40 hours of service, 48 hours of service every year. And we do that by working in communities. We're building gardens right now, and we're also talking about environmental and social justice as well. This slide, I love it because I had the privilege of going to Dubai and participating in Mika Brzezinski's 30 over 50 women's conference. And again, that conference is all about choosing 30 women that are under 30 and 50 of us over 50 and addressing many of the issues. It was in Abu Dhabi. And to do so, I had the privilege of walking the streets of Dubai and seeing these signs and reducing inequalities. And that's all tied into climate change and climate action, sustainable communities, and also gender equity. That's tied into your organization and what it's all about, what things that you've done 2 years for the last 2 years, and I'm hoping for the next 200 years. I mentioned Duke University, the climate justice work that they're doing. I'm really, really impressed with it and feel like there's a lot more to do. Inspiration. I'm also inspired by my late husband. At the age of 50, he was told that he had stomach cancer. And they weren't sure why a man that young would have that. The doctors asked many, many times, did he grow up near any toxic waste sites? And perhaps um, water source or whatever. And we started doing some looking at where he grew up in the inner city of Chicago. And many people in those neighborhoods ended up with cancer, stomach cancer. And it's really a sad situation on how these things happen and the environmental injustice associated with them. And so my inspiration these days is to work harder in his honor. And because we think about what is it that we need to do, and I have this slide here on climate because I feel like this is a big one when we think about heart health and how does climate change, what impact it has on our heart. That slide shows you that, of course, climate change and asthma, because we know that we're seeing an increase in many things. when it comes to climate pollution that's related and connecting us to asthma as well as allergies and others. And I think this slide is very important, not just for us as biologists, but for many of the lay people that we talk to on a day-to-day basis. To make people feel more inclusive, in many cases, they have to have the information they need so they can sit down and discuss some of these matters and why they're important to us. I work and I serve on the board of directors for Brown Advisory, and they are an investment firm that cares a lot about sustainability. And so this slide, I believe, is important because when I talk about us needing all hands on deck, what we don't realize is some people are not interested in the outdoors like we are in terms of a career, but they might be interested in investment banking. And so, or they might be interested in businesses. And so I like to share with them, here are some of the ways in which we can get others involved in these fields as well. And so this slide is all about getting them involved. So as I think about excellence, mentoring is so important. And I encourage you all, if you are researchers or you're biologists, make sure you find the right kind of mentor. Surround yourself with the dreamers, the doers, the believers, and the thinkers. But most of all, surround yourself with those who see greatness within you, even when you don't always see it within yourself. And I think that's what you're getting here from this organization and what they're all about. This is what you get when you talk about inclusiveness. This is why it's important to have this. My mentee, I mentioned her because she sent me this card, and it is one that I treasure and look at quite frequently because even in my position where I have gone and worked in all of these different jobs, whether it was the chief of staff at U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, whether it was the assistant director and head of fisheries in this country, whether I was facilitating a White House conference on the environment, whether I was receiving awards, Hall of Fame awards, or whatever. Sometimes I do not and still do not see the greatness in myself. And so I have to oftentimes see it in others and help them see it in me so I can elevate them and move them ahead. And that's why I believe mentoring is so important. Samantha Miller, she volunteered to shadow me for a summer. And after that summer, one of the meetings she had a chance to shadow me with, and I encourage people to do this because this really enhances opportunities and accessibility, which is why what you're doing is so important too. And from one of those meetings, she met someone at the National Wildlife Federation. They encouraged her to apply for a fellowship there. She has now been there for, I believe, 5 years, doing outstanding work. And so this is an example of where it happens. This is an example when it doesn't always happen, when we practice what Dr. Covey talks about in his book, when he's talking about trust and how do we build trust as we think about inclusiveness, criticizing, complaining, negatively competing and comparing. My job in Atlanta, I was dying to get back to the South. I had a job, but I had a boss that I didn't have a good relationship with. So I practiced these four cancers of life. I usually stop here and ask you to think about which one of these cancers of life you want to work on, understanding they will eat you alive inside and out if you don't work on them. I almost lost my job. Career derailment almost happened because I criticized. Criticizing what I know now, I know a lot more about it because I've studied it and I have the professional help that I needed to get through this in training. Criticizing, usually I was talking to not the person that I should have been talking to. I criticized him to a person that could not do anything about what was going on. I complained to anyone who would listen. One thing we know about complaining is that research have proven 80% of the people we're complaining to, they don't care. The other 20% of the people that we complain to, they're so happy whatever happened to you is not happening to them at the time. So criticizing and complaining. And then we go into comparing. And a lot of times when we face isolationism, racism, sexism, and all of that, we move into this area that can really, really eat us up. And in my case, I almost lost my position comparing. We're either putting ourselves up or bringing someone down. We need to be careful. And then friendly competition is okay, but I'm talking about the kind that's not so friendly. And I practiced that because I was in my defensive mode. I was trying to survive. And while he had a lot of problems with many other people, I made this my problem and I almost went through career derailment. So, what I want you to do now, I'd be interested because I do a lot of stuff and I don't get paid for a lot of the work that I do, or I give a family and friends rate, which is the case most of the time. But if you could remember nothing else that I've said, I want you to remember this one: criticizing, complaining, negatively competing, and comparing. And write in the chat which one of these you'd like to work on. I want to make my best better because I know you're good already out there. My best better by working on which one of these. I want you to put them in the chat and we'll see what we got here at the end of my conversation here. I've already talked about that. What I want to say is once we know in the chat, I'm seeing some things coming in more and more, which one you want to work on. One of these is so important. I got a chance to go to Alaska 7 times and watch being in an environment, whether it was Alaska or Africa, watching when people didn't have to deal with some of the uh, feeling excluded situation, just how they flourish when they were among their own people, doing building their communities. More in the chat, others criticizing, complaining, negatively competing and comparing. But back to that experience, what I know for a fact, this is so true. And so I know why this work is important in what you're doing. I am at my best when I feel good about myself in your presence. I am at my best when I feel good about myself in your presence. Think about it. What makes you feel good in the presence of others? As I close my presentation here and be open for Q&As, and again, I'm going to go to the chat and see what kind of things we have in there. You know, life is hard, and I talk about many of the struggles that I had that were hard in life. But I also know that when we are in positions that we're in, and I've had the privilege of being a leader for almost half of my life now in a leadership position. So this bad base, boss babe really stood out. And it was another card that I got. It said, even on my worst days, I have to believe that I'm killing it. And I know that I can, I will, and I must. And so with that, I am going to see what I have in the chat here. Hi, Mamie. I got my 5-minute warning. Um, Comparing is a common theme. Comparison is truly the theme of joy, as one participant says. So um, that's what I have to say. R, do we have a minute or two for questions? Or
Yes, of course. You ended with just an extra time too, so we have a couple more minutes to be able to ask some more questions. But first, I want to thank you for giving that wonderful presentation. I know I was inspired. I was taking notes as I was listening because I'm like, oh, I need to write that down for future reference. So I want to thank you so much for presenting today. And again, I want to ask folks to use the Q&A section of the Zoom call to type in your questions. First, though, we received some questions beforehand, so some registrants, when they registered for the call, typed in their questions then. So I want to start with those first,
Mhm.
and then see how far we get and try to answer some of the questions from the live chat right now. So
Mhm.
first off, I want to ask, what are the biggest safety challenges you faced in the field thus far?
So I'll have to say my challenges started just working in the field and feeling safe being a woman in the field by alone. And I had some safety issues related to the work that I was doing, being a fisheries biologist, just dealing with boats and getting out on the water and really, really understanding the climate that I was in and the weather. And so that's one burden in itself. And when you add on top of that, being out and alone, being a woman out was another issue for me. But living and working in Wisconsin and Minnesota and Missouri, as you can imagine, being a Black woman out in those areas, I experienced a lot of different situations where people, number one, they thought I was out there to harm them. And so they questioned my being there. I've often had to show my government ID. I've often had to have my uniform on. There have been times when people didn't like not only people that look like me, but also didn't like government workers. And so I had to take and drive my vehicle without a shield of any sort on it. So I had to take off the shield. I had my tires, the air taken out of my tires, when I'm out there trying to do field work. Um, I've I've been called the N word in a large form. I've been told that I didn't belong in meetings like that, certain environments like that. So psychological safety is something that I've experienced, but also, some physical safeties. And I brought with me a lot of my own biases because growing up in the rural South, most of the time when my friends went outside, my fellow third graders, the parents said, have fun. When I went outside, mama would say, be safe, be careful, because her image of what happened outside was seeing or hearing about someone that was killed out there in the woods, or years earlier hung in the woods or burned in the woods. And so the woods was not a place, or the forested wetlands or other areas were not a place that my mother felt comfortable with me going out by myself. And so I had to get over that, because as an adult, I had to overcome that. But the joy, the passion, the inspiration, and the excellence overruled all of that, because even to this day, I'd rather do that than anything else.
Yeah, I can resonate with that, having grown up in the South as well. And, there's sundown towns, and,
Mhm,
outdoors can be a really dangerous place if you're not in the cultural majority.
Where did you grow
So
up? Where did you grow
I,
up?
I I grew up in Raleigh, North Carolina, but I have
Mhm,
some family that lives about an hour or two out in rural farming areas, and
mhm,
had a similar sort of reaction to,
mhm.
outside can be dangerous for things that are more than just sort of nature. People are
Yeah,
animals, and they're out there too. So I definitely resonate with that answer.
yeah.
Um, and so, sort of continuing with that,
Mhm.
did you ever feel fear or worry during your career? So you mentioned a little bit of that. And if so, how did you overcome it? And I think you kind of highlighted on that, but if you want to
Yeah,
kind of elaborate a little bit more about overcoming some fear or worry or,
yeah.
anxiety throughout your
I still
career.
I still do, and I had to really get some good help on understanding what it is that I feared. And we all have fears. We just have to know what they are. Will Schultz has written a book about the human element, and some of his work is really far out, but his work on the human element is so important because it deals with fear. It's that psychological fear that we were talking about earlier, are uh, fear of abandonment, fear of being unliked, and fear of being incompetent. And so in my first couple of jobs, I had the fear of feeling incompetent, of being viewed as incompetent. And that's because I was told that I was a DEI hire. And I believed that for a while until I had to really feel secure about it. And so hearing that from other people that I work with, basically saying, I don't know why you got that job. My friend is more qualified than you, and hearing that over and over, I started to believe in myself that I was somewhat incompetent. Um, Over the years, I found out that my dominant fear is the fear of abandonment. And if I tie that back into being a third grader and being abandoned, and what I've seen and what I saw is that when people were threatened by me and my intelligence or my ability to survive, they would exclude me. And I see that happening today. I was at a meeting earlier this week, and I saw guys huddle over in a corner, and I knew what they were doing. They were marginalizing me because they knew that what they were going to say, that I could challenge it, and that I was going to probably stop it because of my influence. And so the fear of abandonment is one that I work on all of the time, but it's justifiable. I just have to be mindful of it and say, okay, you know you fear this, right? Or you got to first, and you
Mm-hmm.
got to overcome that self-negative talk, because that negative talk would take me, I would fear it where I would see myself getting kicked out of a job, being homeless. I'll go all the way down. I will spiral. And we can do that easily, right? I mean, once we get that fear in us, but it's justifiable in many cases to start there, because I've seen them do they've done themselves like that. So of course they will do us like that.
Yeah, I can again relate to that. I am a constant worrier. If I can imagine the worst case scenario, I'll imagine something even more extreme. So, and it kind of answers one of the questions we had in the Q&A was about imposter syndrome, and
Hmm.
how do you kind of overcome that? And it sounds like what you're kind of saying is kind of that self-belief of recognizing that things are happening around you and you may not necessarily be able to control the other people, but
Hmm.
if you're focusing on you and you understand that no, I can stop them, or I can ignore them, or I can do what I need to do and kind of focus on me and be sure I'm in a good place.
Hmm.
That seems to be, am I hearing that as kind of your advice of kind of, focus on your own power and your own empowerment in those situations? Is that kind of
Right.
what you're saying?
Right, and find your superpower. What is it? And then use it, because yeah, you're right. For me, that imposter syndrome, I don't belong. I mean, I was on stage about to become inducted into the Hall of Fame, and I'm thinking about there's so many other people that deserves this more than me. Um and then I thought, no, your superpower has been what your mother taught you on her dying bed. One of the things that she said to me was, Mamie, as long as you have a positive attitude, as long as you keep that smile, as long as you stay, choose happiness, you're going to be okay. And so that's my superpower now. And when I get that imposter syndrome, first of all, you have to acknowledge it, and you have to tell other people that are in your circle to help you with that too. So you need an accountability partner to deal with to deal with some of the imposter syndrome that you have. And then you move from there to, like you said, believing in yourself and that you deserve it. So then I just kind of like, oh yeah, I own this. How many times was I out there in the field where I felt like I was gonna couldn't even speak or talk because it was so cold in Green Bay, Wisconsin. How many times have people in Green Bay asked me if I were a Packer's wife or a prostitute, because those were the black people we saw in Green Bay. I mean, I owned all of this. How many times I cleaned fish raceways, I need to just say this belongs to me. And not only that, but this belongs to my Samanthas, because or my ours, or my founders of Field Inclusive, because if I don't do this and you all don't see me, you have no shoulders to stand on. So that helps me through some of that to move on.
I, that's I'm learning so much from you just now, just talking with you, and I want to thank you for sharing that. I want to go on to one of the next questions. So this person says, thank you for taking the time to share with us. You've accomplished so much throughout your career. Did you ever make a plan for your career path? And if so, how did you know when you should switch direction or stick with your plan?
So I never made a plan for my career. No, I didn't do that. In fact, I never saw myself. And I can remember at least 3 jobs that I was asked to apply for, that I didn't apply for the positions because I didn't think I was ready. Um and for me, I felt like if I just waited for the right opportunity, versus saying, here's what I want to do, that I might miss an opportunity itself. I did have a goal of going south, but when I got there, I hated it. So that's why plans don't always work out for you either. Um, so I can't say that I had a straight shot to the top. I never had an intention of doing that. Now, I was a researcher and I realized that I didn't like that, and they really didn't. I was not that good at it either. I was more of a policy person and an engagement person and a facilitator of great things. And so I knew that it was time for me to shift. And the good news about working at U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, I had that option. I could say, I want to be a field biologist. I don't want to be indoors. I don't want to do research in a lab. That's just not my preference right now. But I learned to respect those that did that so I could have the tools that I use. But never did I have an action plan. I think it depends on a person's personality, right? Or some people they wake up in the morning and they know what they're going to do the rest of the day, and they're not comfortable if they don't do that. Um, I recently got married again. I talked about being a widow at the age of 50, and thank goodness I'm a COVID bride, and my husband is a pilot, and he has to have that kind of structure in his life because he has to look at the weather and many factors. And so, as you can imagine, when he wakes up in the morning, he says, well, what are you going to do on Saturday? I'm thinking he's thinking about Saturday, and I'm still on this morning at 6 a.m. But I need people like that in my life, but that's just not how my path went. It was more zigzag.
That makes sense. I'm sort of a similar person of, I'm still trying to figure out what I really want to do, and whatever works right now, and
Mhm.
I don't have that larger path forward, but I know the next steps I need to take, those like one or two baby steps to get where I want to be. So again, I resonate with that answer as well.
And know your values.
Mhm.
And then when you get in a situation, you'll know what you will and won't do, though. So I know my 5 values. Everybody should know your 5 values. So when I moved up in the organization, I knew what was going to be something that I didn't want to do, right? What kind of jobs I did not want, what kind of people I would not work for. I talked about presidential appointees that I work for. If you know your values and what they are, you know who you're not going to work for too. So that is as important as anything, or what companies you will or won't work for. Know your values and don't wait until you're halfway across the stream to determine what they are. Take some time right now this week and say, here are my 5 values that I'm going to live by.
That is some excellent advice.
Mhm.
And kind of similar to that, have politics and presidential cycles, negatively affected your career in any way?
They have. As you can imagine, because I work for political appointees. I've never been a political appointee. But I was always that person, the sandwich person in between the politicals and the career people. And in one position that I was in, mountaintop mining in West Virginia, was something that when I saw what it was doing, not only to the mines, but a lot of my work I care about because of the people. And I didn't like what I heard and saw. And that was an example of a situation. I don't want to go into any details, but it had an influence over some of my decisions that I had to make. So I would say absolutely. Um, while in Massachusetts as a regional director, former governor Ann Richards from the state of Texas, her daughter now is really active in Planned Parenthood, and Governor Richards came to my office to talk to me about filling some wetlands in New York, Hackensack Meadowlands, to build a shopping mall. And I had some strong views over that, and stood my grounds on that. And so sometimes there are consequences to that, and sometimes there are opportunities. For the most part, I was very fortunate, but there were some cases where I just, it was just plain not fair, and not right. And fair is one of my values. So I had to make some decisions.
There you go. So we're at 2:59. We're almost out of time, but I want to end on a quick positive question that in my past experience working for a science museum, we like to end our virtual sessions with people of what brings you the most joy about your work? Or not necessarily the most joy, but something, you mentioned with your husband, the pilot, he has a plan, he has sort of the action set for the day. When he wakes up, he knows what he wants to do. For you, what is one thing that when you wake up, you're like, this is going to bring me joy with what I do each day? What's
Yeah,
a short answer for that?
sure, sure. My joy. my joy comes from not thinking about what I'm doing, but what I'm doing for others and how I can inspire them, how I can motivate them, how I can give them that passion, that inspiration, and show them excellence in conservation.
That is a beautiful answer. Thank you so much.
Thank
And
you.
yeah, and so we are right now at 3 o'clock. So I want to quickly announce our giveaway winner. So again, for people who registered, you entered your name into a drawing, and I want to say a big congratulations to Shannon Anderson. So Shannon, if you're watching, please check your email so we can get you your giveaway prize. Thank you for your support and donation to Field Inclusive. And thank you to everyone who participated in this webinar and those who continue to support Field Inclusive. Be sure to follow and interact with us on all of our social media channels. That's Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, all at the handle at Field Inclusive, all one word. Please also be sure to visit our website to learn more about our organization and ways that you, as an individual or an organization, can support us. There were several questions in the chat that were not answered, but I have those written down. So afterwards, you may see a follow-up email with some of those answers for people who are curious. It'll be the email you registered for. So also stay tuned for that. And with that, I want to say thank you, Dr. Parker. Thank you so much, Mamie, for joining us today. Thank you for everyone for staying that extra minute over. And again, Shannon, be on the lookout for that email for your prize. And without further ado, enjoy the rest of your day, y'all. Have fun, and thank you again for joining us. And happy birthday to Field Inclusive.
And we're glad you were born. Bye.
Yes, yes. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye.